Welcome to Zollner Arts Center's sold-out screening of the movie Spotlight. We'll follow the movie with a conversation with Lehigh's own Marty Baron. Still showing in theaters, Spotlight has been nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. In the film, actor Liev Schreiber portrays Marty as editor of the Boston Globe during the time when the groundbreaking investigation occurred of sexual abuse by clergy in the Catholic Church. I'd like to thank Marty for helping bring this movie to Lehigh and for personally sharing his experience and insights with us. There are a few highlights about Marty not included in the movie that I'd like to point out. Marty earned his undergraduate degree in journalism in 1976 with honors, while simultaneously earning his MBA degree. That's a pretty impressive feat, considering he also served as editor-in-chief of the student newspaper, the Brown and White. He will quickly tell you that while at Lehigh, he spent more time in the basement of the University Center in the former Brown and White staff office than he did in class. Not something that I recommend for any student, particularly Brown and White staff members who might be here tonight. Since graduation, Marty has been, among other things, editor at 3 of the nation's most prestigious and award-winning newspapers: the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and the Miami Herald. In January 2013, he became the executive editor of the Washington Post, a position he holds today. Under his leadership, the newspapers have won many acclaimed awards, including a combined 10 Pulitzer Prizes, the highest honor in journalism. These have been in the categories of breaking news reporting, public service, explanatory journalism, national reporting, and criticism. With Marty at the helm, the Washington Post in particular has received 3 Pulitzer Prizes, 2 in 2014 for public service reporting and breaking news, and most recently one in 2015 in the category of national reporting for its investigation of security lapses by the Secret Service. It's no wonder that in journalism circles and beyond, Marty has been called the best news editor of all time. In recognition of his work, which illustrates the critical role that good journalism can play in informing, engaging, and protecting the public, Lehigh University awarded Marty an honorary Doctorate of Humane Letters degree during the 2014 commencement ceremony. We'll now start the film. Afterward, please remain seated for a 30-minute onstage conversation and Q&A with Marty and Jack Luley, Professor and Chair of the Department of Journalism and Communication. Thank you for joining this evening, and enjoy the movie.
Well, thank you for being here. Sound okay? Okay, good. Marty's told me he's been to a number of these screenings already, and this is the largest. And so I think it's sort of fitting that it's Lehigh. So our plan is for me to ask Marty a few questions for 15 or 20 minutes or so, and then we want to open up the floor to your own questions. And you'll see microphones at either end of this mid-aisle here, and that's where we'll ask you to make your questions from, since the place is so big. So let's begin, and I actually have to take time to offer my own thanks to Marty for making the time to be with us again. He's here a lot. Lehigh fosters a loyalty among its alumni, but Marty's loyalty and generosity to Lehigh and the department and the Brown and White really been inspiring. So I wanted to first thank you for that. So let's take up where the movie left off, with the impact of the investigation. So the movie shows the phones ringing off the hook with the people coming forward who've been abused, and it's a very fitting conclusion. I saw the interviews with the director who fought hard to keep that conclusion. And it's important because I think victims of abuse, survivors, continue to have a lot of important conversations around the movie. I think we probably have some with us in the audience even who have reached out. So even though it's a story about a newspaper taking on a powerful institution, the newspaper touched the lives of a lot of ordinary people. And so I was wondering when you and the reporters realized the story was going to have this tremendous emotional impact on victims of abuse, and how did you start preparing for that?
Well, I'm not sure we knew how to prepare. First of all, thank you, everybody, for coming. I was expecting a couple of hundred people, and it's considerably more than that, so let me say that first off. I don't know that we knew how to prepare. We knew that there would probably be a strong reaction by the church. We did, in fact, staff up on the switchboard when we used to have switchboards. We thought there might be protest. We thought there would be some of the same reaction that happened after the Father Porter case, where there was where the cardinal actually did, in fact, call down the power of God on the Boston Globe, and where the editor did break his leg afterwards. So we thought there might be something similar that would play out. What we saw was, what you saw up there was the first story that ran. Subsequent to that, of course, was the bigger story about the dozens and dozens of priests who had engaged in serial sex abuse and who had been continually reassigned by the cardinal and by the entire hierarchy of the archdiocese. And that gave a sense of the extent of the cover-up. And so immediately the cardinal came out and apologized. He himself used the word betrayal, which it certainly was. And he promised a set of reforms. But it was apparent to us that those reforms were very weak, they were full of holes, that he wasn't disclosing the full extent of the problem. There were many more cases out there. There was much more to report. And so, we continued reporting, and we did 600 stories in the first year, which is a lot, but we did 900 stories probably in the first year and a half. And that's because we felt there was more to report, and we also felt that in many ways we needed to keep the pressure on. Over time, what you saw among the Catholic community was not anger at the Boston Globe. It was fury at the church, a real strong sense of betrayal. Because the documents really laid out in a way that had never been done before how insensitive the church was, how cavalier it was in dealing with this issue, and that it was fully knowledgeable about what it was doing. And so it disclosed that the church was, which it was supposed to be a refuge, was anything but that. And so over time there was fury among the parishioners, and fury among the priests, many priests too, who felt betrayed by the hierarchy, because there are many good priests as well. And eventually, some 80 priests signed a letter calling for Cardinal Law's resignation, which was really extraordinary for that to happen in an archdiocese. And he ultimately did resign, as you saw, although he went off to a very cushy position at the Vatican. But the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops implemented a set of reforms in the interim. Those two had some problems with them. We kept up the pressure. And what happened, I think, as a result of our reporting is that a lot of other media organizations felt emboldened and empowered by what we had done, and they started doing some of the same things. So you saw a number of big cases in Philadelphia and Los Angeles. Los Angeles was one of the biggest and certainly the most expensive settlements that the church has ever made. And Cardinal Roger Mahony, who was there, who had been adored in the past, was disclosed as a result of documents that became available, that he had covered up to an extent that was even greater than what had happened in Boston. And so this has now become a national issue and a worldwide issue, and it continues to haunt the church to this day. Even as the even as the Pope was visiting the United States a few months ago, he was having to confront this issue. And there are serious questions today as to how the church is dealing with this, whether it's taking it seriously enough, whether it's acting energetically enough. Just in the last couple of weeks, a member of something that's called the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors was forced off that commission because he was so critical of the Pope and the entire church.
I was watching the movie and I could see why it was so often compared to All the President's Men, which was another film that showed the hard work of investigative reporting. And that movie was credited with inspiring this whole generation of journalists, including me, and a generation of appreciation for journalism. I'm thinking that in today's world, though, it seems like journalism's under attack and from a lot of places, and is very much underappreciated. And so I'm wondering, you've traveled a lot for the movie, you've traveled a lot for your job, and I wonder if you could talk about how the movie might be helping people appreciate and understand the role of journalism in society today.
Right. Well, I think that it's interesting because, when we came out with the stories in 2002, and the first one ran on January 6th of 2002, it had an enormous impact on the church and ultimately led to a Pulitzer Prize for us for public service and led to reforms within the church. But you can't get the message to the public except through popular culture, it turns out. And so this movie is able to sort of take the message of the role of the press in society to millions and millions of people around the country and around the world, and that's what it's doing. I hope it's sending a message to owners, publishers, editors that they should rededicate themselves to investigative reporting. I hope it's causing the public to appreciate the need for journalism, to understand its role in society, to recognize that however flawed we are, and we're plenty flawed, that we're still necessary. And I hope it causes everybody, people in the press and the public generally, to listen to people who have fallen to the margins of society or been pushed to the margins of society, and to listen to them and to give them a voice, hear their voices, because they have something important to say. And that's what I hope happens as a result of this movie.
Yeah. I was thinking about, we were teasing Marty because he's going to be going to the Oscars pretty soon. And I'm thinking how powerful the movie is, and it's going to be up alongside these blockbuster movies and things, and it's such an important story to tell, and it's going to be such a good site for it to tell those stories. So we know journalism's a business, but as the movie shows, it's more than a business. Journalism has responsibilities to its local community and an important role in the community. But sometimes for me, it seems that communities have lost faith in journalism. They associate journalism with cable television and screaming matches. They turned away from their local newspapers and their local television stations. So I'm wondering how local news organizations can kind of keep or regain that faith that people once had in journalism?
Well, I think that this movie, one of the things that's so great about this movie, and which certainly journalists have appreciated, is that it shows journalism in an authentic way. That's the way journalism is practiced, and particularly investigative reporting. There's so many movies that misportray it. It's just some person whispering something in your ear, or it's just one leak or something like that. That's not the way it works. This is the way it works. And it requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of people, and often it requires a lot of time to do the biggest, most important stories. So, the question is, how do we make the public aware of that? How do we make the public sort of appreciate our role? How do we sort of solidify the bonds with the communities that we serve? One thing that's important to point out is this started as a local story. This was just covering one priest, one case. He had been accused of abusing as many as 80 kids, but it was a local story, in the same way that Watergate started as a local story. And so it's very important to have a vigorous local press, because, first of all, you're serving the community, and secondly, these local stories may be emblematic of something that's really big and happening at the national and international level. And what can we do? It's hard to say, because we have a public that's so skeptical of the press, and I understand the skepticism. And I think people have asked me, what should we do? And I would say we should do our jobs. We should do our work. Work like this, I think, demonstrates the value of the press to society. I think that this work, even though we expected blowback on the part of Catholics in the community, actually solidified our ties with Catholics in the community, because they had felt so betrayed. And I can't tell you how many times people told me, devout Catholics, told me that they were so grateful for what we did, because it caused the church to be cleaned up. Not sure it's entirely cleaned up yet, but it started the process of cleaning up the church, and they were grateful for that. And I think we worry too much about how to placate and how to satisfy our readers, and I think what people really want is they want a press that does its job honestly, honorably, fairly, accurately, but also energetically and aggressively and unflinchingly. And a press that has a set of core values, knows what it stands for, and one of the things that it stands for, and I think what the public appreciates, is that it holds powerful institutions and powerful individuals accountable. And there's a lot of talk these days about the responsibility of the press, but I believe that the single most irresponsible thing we could do would be to stop holding powerful interests accountable.
I'm actually going to skip ahead to one of my questions because it fits so well. Because we hosted Anthony Lewis here a while ago at Lehigh, a great reporter for the New York Times and someone I know that Marty has read. And he wrote something about the American press. He said, "The American press has been given extraordinary freedom by the Supreme Court's interpretations of the First Amendment. In return, it owes society courage." And so this is what made me think of it. It takes a lot of courage to take on the powerful. And I was thinking that the Globe had to deal with these fairly intense charges from the Catholic Church and cardinal law that you were being unfair. But you also ran into the same conflict when the Washington Post published stories on Edward Snowden and Edward Snowden's documents. So can you talk a little bit about the pressure you faced in your career, not just in Boston? And then what is it about you and then about journalism that allows people to have the courage to speak truth to power?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that quote from Anthony Lewis. I had that in my commencement speech that I gave a couple of years ago.
That's where I heard it.
It's in a book called Freedom for the Speech We Hate, which we should all, I think, embrace free speech, whether we like it or not. People have asked me on any number of occasions, how did you have the courage to go against the Catholic Church? First they ask, why did you decide to go against the Catholic Church? First thing. And the answer is I didn't decide to go against the Catholic Church. I decided to pursue a story that was right in front of us. It was a journalistic impulse. And when people ask, well, how is it, how do you have the courage to go against powerful institutions? My answer is, that's our job. That's what journalism is all about. I don't understand how we can't do that. I think that it's, the single most important thing we can do is to hold powerful institutions accountable and powerful individuals accountable. The more powerful, the more important that we do it, because an abuse of power is among one of the worst things in our society. And people are often prone to abusing power the more they collect, the more power they collect. And so to me, it's just like, what is our job? Thinking through what is our job, having a clear sense of what our job is as journalists, and then just doing our job. I don't think of it as courage. People have talked about us in the aftermath of the movie as heroes or things like that. That is not a term that I would at all embrace. I don't see ourselves that way. Heroes are for people who risk their lives or risk the lives of their families or things like that. And there are real heroes in this world, but I don't think we should think of ourselves as journalists as heroes. I think we should think of ourselves as journalists, doing our job, doing our work, having a clear sense of what our mission is in this world and in this society, in a democratic society, and just do it, just do the job. And I try to block out, you think through everything, of course, but ultimately it's like, well, is this what we should be doing? Is this in the public interest? And that's what we always think. Is this in the public interest? And sure, people will say, well, who are you to decide? What gives you the right to decide? And the answer I always give is the Constitution. Gives us the right to decide. And there's a specific provision in the Constitution that opens the way for a free press and for free speech generally, and for freedom of religion and some other things. Freedom of assembly, and we should be very grateful for that. But that right means absolutely nothing if we don't if we don't take advantage of that right. And so the press is just part of that. But if we don't do what we're supposed to be doing, then the First Amendment doesn't mean anything at all.
Thank you. So I thought the film did an interesting portrayal of you as an outsider, new to the community, not Catholic, not a baseball fan. Ours. And so, first of all, I'm wondering if the movie overstated that, but that's just sort of a movie question. More broadly, I'm wondering if you think that news organizations need to maintain that kind of outsider status in their community in order to do the work they need to do.
Right. Well, on whether the movie overstated it, I would say no, it did not overstate it. When I went to, it's interesting because to watch the movie, you would have to believe that I have absolutely no sense of humor. And many of my closest friends have said, well, they don't capture your sense of humor and your warmth. It's a small minority of people, by the way, who say that. But, I say that was a particular time also. I was going to a newspaper where I really didn't know anybody. I was going to a city where I didn't know anybody. I was labeled immediately as an outsider, not a newcomer. They're different words, by the way, and they mean different things. They connote different things. And so I was labeled as an outsider. 4 of the people who reported directly to me were people who had wanted that job and had sought that job. So it's awkward. And then, we immediately embarked on the church investigation. I understood the implications of that. It was very serious. So the journalism had taken a serious turn. 6 weeks afterwards were the attacks of 9/11, first attack on the country since Pearl Harbor. And I think most of us here can recall the shock to the system that represented. And then within days, there was the anthrax scare, which has been largely forgotten, but which was terrifying at the time. And so it was a very tense time, and for me, a lonely time as well. So it was not a joyful time for me, and I got over it. I got better, much better. So, but in terms of do we need to be outsiders? I don't think we need to be outsiders. What we need to be independent. We can be members of the community, obviously. We don't have to come in as strangers. But there's a scene in the movie, the scene where I meet the cardinal, where I'm portrayed as saying, there's creative license in this movie, by the way, so this may shock you. But it's important to remember that it is a movie, it's not a documentary. So there have been documentaries on this. So, but where I say that we need to stand alone, and I do believe that. I mean, I think that and I have said that in any number of speeches and remarks that I've made over the years, is that we need to stand apart from the community as well. We can be part of the community, but we need to exercise independent judgment and ultimately make our decisions independently. And so that's what I believe. I don't believe that we have to be strangers to the community. I don't think we should be strangers to the community. I think we should understand our communities really well and have a lot of people who are from the community. But at some point, and it happens with Robbie in this movie, at some point, it's like, nope, there's something bigger here. There's something more important. And that is called the truth. And we have an absolute obligation to tell the truth as best as we can determine it. And that's more important than our ties to the community.
You just lead into my question so well, I'll tell you. First of all, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, and so if you've got questions you'd like to ask Marty, I'll finish in 2 more questions. The first one has to do with the Washington Post has long had this set of principles displayed on the walls of its old, and I found out today on its new building, that begin, the first mission of a newspaper is to tell the truth as nearly as the truth may be ascertained. And yet, sometimes in our time, it seems like truth has been devalued. Telling the truth about poverty, food stamps, income inequality, climate change, it sometimes doesn't seem to matter. So I'm wondering how good journalism can thrive in a context where people may not be so interested in hearing the truth.
I don't worry about whether they're too much about whether they're interested in hearing it. I'm interested in whether we're telling it. So it's important for us to tell it. I can't control whether people will listen or not. I know what we stand for. I know what our values are, and we make a determined effort to tell the truth and to find out facts. Unfortunately, we live in a time where people live in are getting their information in various ways, and they live in parallel information universes, and they tend to be drawn to sources of information that affirm their pre-existing point of view. You know, there's an extraordinary number of people in this country who believe that Obama wasn't born in the United States, all right? Even though all the evidence shows that he was, and there is no evidence that shows that he wasn't. There is a substantial portion of people in this country who believe that Jews didn't show up for work on 9/11 in the World Trade Center because they somehow knew it was going to be attacked and that this was the work of Jews. It's a large percentage of the population who believes that. There's not an insubstantial portion of the population that believes that some of the mass shootings are fabrications and that they never happened. Sandy Hook, San Bernardino, things like that. And that they were merely orchestrated film events in order to promote the cause of gun control. It's an extraordinary time that we live in, where people, believe things that simply did not happen. You have a leading presidential candidate, and you can guess who says there were thousands of people, thousands of Muslims who were cheering the fall of the World Trade Center towers, even though there is no video of that. Initially he said it was well covered at the time, and there's no video available of that, and now he says the press is hiding it from us. So it was both well covered and now is hidden. I don't know how that's possible, but apparently that is. So, I mean, we live in a time where unfortunately, people believe what they want to believe, and that's true at times it's as true of the left as it is of the right. And I think our job is, it's a difficult period to navigate for the press, but I think ultimately we have to have a compass of our own, and the compass is, well, what's the truth ultimately? Let's be true to ourselves, let's tell the truth, we'll lay it out there. I don't know what I can do about how people receive it.
So my final question will bring us back to Lehigh. I saw a recent interview you did with the Brown and White, and if you're interested in Marty and his career and his time at Lehigh, it's really one of the best profiles I've read of Marty. You'll find it at the Brown and White online. A really good story on him. And
it was very Lehigh-centric, by the way.
That's called a plug. So you said, I really valued my experience at Lehigh, and I feel indebted to the school, not only for my education, but for the values instilled in me at Lehigh. So I was thinking about that. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what kind of values did you take away from Lehigh that you still find of use to you today?
I think that I had a moral code when I came. I value people who have a moral code, something they stand for. It's one of the things that I talked about in that commencement speech is figure out what you stand for. If you don't stand for anything, you've got a problem. Ultimately, you're going to have to make some tough decisions in life, and you have to figure out what it is you stand for. And I think that got reinforced here. I think that I had many wonderful professors here, but within the journalism department, there were two at the time, all of two, and it was Joe McFadden and Bob Sullivan, and they both had a strong sense of right and wrong. And how to go about our work, and that was very much, I think, driven into us. And I think that's something that really stuck with me. I had other professors like that. One whom I saw today, Nicholas Balopkins. I don't know if he's here today, but a great economics professor, and we talked about economic evolution and how different systems developed over time, and he's a professor who has a strong sense of what's right and what's wrong as well. And that was true of many professors. And then I experienced it a lot just practicing journalism, working at the Brown and White. I had to decide what do I do? What do I publish? What don't I publish? What do I withhold? To what extent am I intruding on somebody's privacy? To what am I, affecting somebody's reputation? And those are tricky, very tricky issues that we deal with every day, and we deal with on deadline, and now we deal with by the minute. And so I think that overall, here at Lehigh, I had a very good grounding in all of that. Basically 4 years of training for the rest of my life and the rest of my career. And so I certainly appreciate that, and that's why I keep coming back and want to give back to the university as much as I practically can.
Thank you. So Marty and I are both interested in questions that the audience might have. We have some minutes left for that. So we have 2 microphones there if people have questions to ask. I think you're going to have to go to the microphones to be heard.
You have to go to the microphones, actually.
Hi, my name is Mara Kivett. I graduated with a journalism degree in 2013. My dad actually wrote with you on the brown and white and graduated in 1976. Ah. My question is, why did you...
What does he say?
Why did you come to Lehigh? What made you choose that? And what was your biggest success story with the brown and white?
Gosh. I'm not sure I want to get into it. It's so long. It's, how people end up at college is a very strange process. So, I'll just leave it at I didn't want to get above the Mason-Dixon line, and I was determined to grew up in Tampa, Florida. I really wanted to get out of the South. I wanted to not go to any school where anybody from my high school was going or had ever been. So the field of possibilities was sharply narrowed as a result of that. So what was the second part of the question?
What was your biggest success story at the brown and white?
Oh gosh, I don't know. We did a lot of stories. We did a lot of investigations with the administration. They really hated us, and we actually did polling of the campus. With the help of a statistics professor, we figured out how to do it so that it was actually scientifically. Since I got an MBA, I had to take statistics classes, so I knew kind of generally how one does these things properly. And we consulted with a statistics professor, and we called God knows how many students, and we disclosed that a huge percentage of the university population, the student population, was smoking dope and cheating in classes. I know that comes as a shock to all of you, but needless to say, while it may not have come as a shock to the administration, it's not something that they wanted to reveal to the entire world, and it was somewhat dismaying when the wire services decided to pick that up. And I'm not sure that was the greatest achievement there, but those were some of the things we did.
Okay. I'd like to thank you. It was a very hard movie for me to watch. I tried to see it a couple of times. I only got to the parking lot and turned around. I'm 80+ years old. I was sexually abused by a priest in 1947. I was 11. I live with it every day. I was fatherless. I didn't know if anybody would believe me. I never spoke about it. My wife passed away many years ago. She never knew about it. It was in 47, he molested me. And he was ordained in 1947. There's not a day goes by that I don't have to live with this. I never spoke about it. Like I said, I thank you till it broke in Boston, and I start talking about it. and I wanted to find information about the priest. I lived in Bethlehem, and at that time we were in the Diocese of Philadelphia. I called Philadelphia, and they said, "Oh, we don't keep them files that long. No, we don't have anything." In the meantime, I did find out, and the priest that did say he didn't have any covered it up. He's now in jail. The priest that molested me never spent more than 6 years to a year in a parish, from 47 to 48. He was on leave of absence. They wouldn't tell me why. For a couple of years, twice. I belonged to SNAP. Thank you for that, SNAP. I went on a computer. I did a lot of work on my own. I looked up under bishopsaccountability.org. There he was on a pedophile list. Philadelphia, I do go to therapy. I took my children with me, so they do understand, and they fully support me. And I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, there's not a person in this room who shouldn't be humbled by what you just described. Marty, I'm Helen Richardson from the Lehigh class of 1977.
I know.
A former desk editor of the Brown and White.
Right.
You had mentioned some concern about feedback from the Catholic community in Boston. Since I'm a recovering attorney, I was wondering what kind of legal blowback you had from the Archdiocese. Did they sue the Globe?
The Archdiocese did not sue the Globe. What the Archdiocese did was, while we were conducting our investigation and after we filed their motion, they resisted very aggressively that motion. In fact, at one point, we did get some of the early some documents, this is not reflected in the movie, but some limited documents, and we started asking people questions about it, and including priests. And the church filed a motion asking for a court order that would forbid us from using the information in those documents that we had obtained prior to the unsealing of the records, and barring us from even conducting interviews based on that information. It's the first time in my entire career I ever saw the church or any institution, I should say, any institution or any individual go to court to try to prevent the press from conducting an interview.
Touché.
Hi. Sorry, they don't make these things for short people. I was wondering if you had any advice for the younger generation of journalists, since we have so much news coming out right when it happens, how to do investigative work like you did in this case.
Right. Well, I think it's difficult these days. First of all, the resources available to news organizations are sharply diminished in comparison to what they were before. On top of that, we're now having to write in the moment as a result of the web. There's an enormous amount of competition, and speed is part of that. That said, I think that many news organizations, including digital-only news organizations, are beginning to commit resources for real investigative reporting, I'm happy to say. And so, for example, BuzzFeed now has an investigative unit, and they're hiring people to do investigative reporting. So I think that the reason for that is that many of these news organizations realize that over time, people are going to expect more of their news organizations, whether they happen to be legacy news organizations like ours that grew out of print, or television stations, but also digital-only news organizations. And I think they're going to start giving people the time. My hope is that this movie inspires them to do that, causes them to dedicate themselves to doing work that really matters, that has an enduring impact. So, and I have heard that some of that is already happening. There are various papers that have actually formed investigative units in the aftermath of this movie. It's been very heartening to hear about that. And I've heard from some publishers, including one publisher who said that she feels more determined than ever to find a model that will support work like this. And I also think that the public expects that of us. They really do. And if we don't deliver, they will feel that we have abdicated our responsibilities and they will abandon us. So I'm hopeful that there will be more and more opportunities to do this kind of work.
Thank you.
Hi, Marty. It's Ken Bandler.
Oh, my God. It's my life. This is your life. I've been wondering what happened to you. I keep hearing your name from some of your
Class of
associates,
78. I was
Yes.
a journalism major, international relations major.
Yes.
I was a freshman on the Brown and White when you were the editor.
Very
and
fine
so,
reporter, too. What happened to
and we
you?
did some interesting. did some journalism and went to the other side on public relations,
Right.
but still very involved, and here with a couple of other colleagues, Eileen Quirk-Bowman and Cheryl Winters. Anyway, I wanted to say you've been an inspiration following your career from paper to paper. I think you continue to be an inspiration for journalism students, not just at Lehigh, but throughout the country at different schools. A different kind of question, Marty.
That was a very good question to start with, actually.
Any regrets? Anything happened throughout your career that you look back on that was a regret you would have done differently?
Yeah, sure, of course. Do I have to tell you what they are?
Well, you could do what I do as a spokesman for an advocacy organization, say next question.
Next question?
Now we can see the challenge that Mr. Schreiber had.
I do have some regrets. I'm not sure that I want to do a confessional right here, especially with a camera rolling. So I'd rather not, if that's okay. But
Fair
yes,
enough.
no question about it. I've made many mistakes over time, and what you hope is that you learn from those mistakes. That's all you can hope for.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good evening,
And
Mr. Baron.
let me just add on that. I mean, I mentioned earlier that, I think we have to be honest about our profession, that we are flawed human beings, just like people in any other profession, that we are imperfect. I know people get all upset when we make mistakes, and they should. But we're going to make mistakes just like everybody else. And it's just the nature of being human. I don't think that should delegitimize the institution or discredit the institution. It should be acknowledged that we're just human. Yeah, sorry.
Good evening, Mr. Baron. I'm Xiao. I'm from China and currently studying counseling psychology at the College of Education. And this is my second time of watching this movie, and I still have conflicting feelings of the entire process. For example, when the person said he's just a fool around boys and he's raped, and also the system did bad things on people, but the system does good things on people. So I'm wondering what your thoughts about these conflicts. I mean, maybe your thoughts are not covered in the movie, but maybe you would like to share with us tonight. Thank you.
The things that are not covered in the movies that I want to share?
Yeah,
Let me just address the issue of this is an institution that does good things also, and all we did was highlight the bad things. And that's true. We did. It's not a story about the church in its entirety. It's a story about bad things that the church did, that it engaged in a cover-up. I don't think that we should not disclose wrongdoing because people did other good things. I think our obligation is to disclose wrongdoing, notwithstanding the fact that people did other good things. Certainly the church does a lot of good in this world, and even Cardinal Law, he did have this history where he was active in the civil rights movement. He did take a stand, and he did a lot of other good things over the course of his life. But he did something really terrible here. Instead of, his job, he should have been looking out to protect children. And, people entrusted their children to the church and to priests. And instead of protecting those children, all he sought to do was to protect the reputation of the church and to avoid scandal. And notwithstanding whatever good the church has done, and it's done plenty of good, we still have an obligation to disclose that wrongdoing and to hold people accountable for it.
Thank you.
Hi, Marty. My name's Ed White. We said hello earlier. I'm class of '82 and had the pleasure of following you as a reporter and editor of the Brown and White. And I followed your career and just want to say thank you for being a stellar example of what a Lehigh journalism degree means in the real world. And you've helped to keep Lehigh on the map. My question is, as a working journalist, and I'm back in journalism after 25 years of practicing law, what advice do you have to the non-journalists?
Great time to get into journalism.
Exactly.
You really have an exquisite sense of timing.
Timing is everything, right? Exactly. What advice do you have to the non-journalists in the audience tonight about how to consume the news in today's ever-changing world? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think that people have more choice than ever before. You don't have to rely on just one local newspaper or one national newspaper or anything like that. You have a lot of choices. I think it's really important to decide who you think are credible, who has core values, who really works at disclosing things, or who's just trying to pander to your set of beliefs. And that decision is yours. And I think you should read widely. You should gather different opinions. You should look at institutions that may come at news institutions that come at issues from perhaps different angles. But ultimately, are these reputable institutions? Do they actually have real reporting resources? Or are they just organizations that are trying to propagate a point of view to advance the interests of an ideology or advance the interests of a politician? Or are these institutions that are willing to hold all politicians and all powerful interests accountable? I think that, you can judge institutions by whether they're willing to hold everybody accountable. And judge them fairly and comprehensively. Don't think actually whether, I frequently get people saying, you'd never write anything negative about, let's say, Hillary Clinton. It's like, oh, are you kidding? How about taking a look at what we've written? Or you've never written anything negative about so-and-so. And these are people who haven't done their research. They haven't looked at what we've actually done. So I think it's just important to sort of do your own research about which news organizations are serious, are fulfilling that first principle that we have on our wall at the Washington Post, is that who see it as their first obligation to do everything possible to discover the truth as nearly as it can be ascertained.
I think we have one more question there.
Well, a little more of your past unfolding before you. Gene Mater from class of 71.
All right.
And, my question comes
Gene,
from...
you would have had a field day with this subject, right?
I was Brown and White's political cartoonist and then graduated and then became self-syndicated political cartoonist by the time you were editor-in-chief, which is why I knew you in the way back. And I was self-syndicated with college newspapers across the country until the Washington Post Writers Group expressed an interest in syndicating my work in legitimate ways. And at that point, and this leads me to my question for you, at that point, I evaluated the impact of the constant reading, absorbing, understanding, and finding out more than I otherwise would have had to about what on earth was going on around me. And I concluded, and this is 1979, that to stay in the business of exposing the truth through newspapers, albeit with political cartoons, was turning me into a Class A cynic. Mm-hmm. I did not like myself when I got up in the morning and was facing my work. And I quit, having no plans in the future, but I thought I need to save myself first. And so I'm posing to you the question of how on earth, you've stayed with it, you've been doing it for 40 years, how do you do it and maintain the integrity, the sense of humor, and the sense of well-being?
Wow, that's heavy. Oh boy, I wasn't expecting that question. I was telling Jack earlier that I've heard every single question, and that's not one that I've heard before. So congratulations on that. I don't know. I mean, I feel like. I mean, as a political cartoonist, you're ultimately you have to have a strong point of view, and you kind of have to be biting. You have to make. I mean, you can't be like on the one hand, on the other hand, or anything like that. And I don't think we should do that in journalism generally. I think we should evaluate things fairly, honestly, and go about our work honorably. But ultimately, we determine what the facts are and tell people what we found. I mean, I'm proud of the work that we've done. To me, it's the greatest pleasure. And I think that I've always been involved. I've been fortunate to be involved with news organizations that have a lot of integrity. And I'm pleased with the work that we've done. When we've held people accountable, it's been people of all different ideologies, and without regard to what their ideology is, only with regard to what they did that needed to be held accountable for. And then we've done a lot of things that have done a lot of good for people. Frankly, when people talk about this movie and say thank you for doing this work, thank you for bringing this issue to light. It means the world to me. It's interesting. I've just brought this with me because this is a good opportunity for me to read something, if you don't mind.
I know at all.
So, there's a mention in the movie of Father Tom Doyle, and Father Tom Doyle was a person who had worked years in the church, trying to, with sort of engaging in a lonely battle within the church on behalf of abuse victims, and after. About 13 years ago, after we did our stories and when we came out with a book about the investigation that we did, not about our own process, but about the investigation, he wrote me a letter, and it's a letter that I kept on my desk the rest of my time at the Boston Globe as a reminder of why I was in journalism and why I stayed in journalism. And so I'll just read you this letter, and I think you'll see why. So he wrote, this is Father Doyle, he wrote, "The sexual abuse of children and young adults by Catholic clergy and its cover-up has been the worst thing that has happened to the Catholic Church in many centuries. It has also been the greatest betrayal by churchmen of those whom they are charged to protect. Catholic children have been betrayed, and their parents and friends betrayed. Priests have been betrayed, and the general public has been betrayed. This nightmare would have gone on and on were it not for you and the Globe staff. As one who has been deeply involved in fighting for justice for the victims and survivors for many years, I thank you with every part of my being. I assure you that what you and the Globe have done for the victims, the church and society, cannot be adequately measured. It is momentous, and its good effects will reverberate for decades." That's why I feel good about the work I do.
I think that's going to be a good note to end on. We've had Marty here all day. I think it's time to let him get back to his day job. I hope you agree it's been just a tremendous privilege, to share this movie and this time with him. And please join me in thanking him again.
Thank you.